Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh,
Oh,
hey,
you are
hey,
recording.
Molly.
And are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
Welcome everyone to Baldwin Circle. My name is Mary Newberger. I'm a professor of history here at UT Austin and director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. My co-host is Kirill Varmov.
Thank you very much, Mary. My name is Kirill Avramov. I'm an assistant professor of political science here in the same department. And I'm very happy that today we continue with the tradition, our Fridays to have a community around the Balkan Circle. And we have a very exciting guest today with a very exciting topic, which is called A School Like No Other, the Institute for the Blind and Deaf Mute Queen Mary in Cernauti. And I would like to ask my co-host to introduce our speaker today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maria Bucur, who I've known for years. She is the John B. Hill Professor of History at Indiana University. Her research and teaching interests focus on European history in the modern period, especially social and cultural developments in Eastern Europe, with a special interest in Romania, geographically, and gender, thematically. She's written many books, including Heroes and Victims, Remembering War in 20th Century Romania, Gender and Modernism, a historical reappraisal of the canon, The Century of Women, How Women Changed the World in the 20th Century, The Birth of Democratic Citizenship, Women in Power in Modern Romania, that she co-authored with Mihaela Miroi. I know I said that wrong. And most recently, The Nation's Gratitude, World War I and Citizenship Rights in Interwar Romania. Her current research project focuses on developing a platform for the study of the history of disabilities in Eastern Europe. So I'm really excited to, oh, I'm sorry, I left out your first book, which was Eugenics and Modernization in Interwar Romania. So we're excited to hear about your project today, Maria.
And thank you so much for putting up with my delaying my presence here. I should say this was scheduled for about more than a year ago, Mary, initially, and then we kind of kept changing it, and thanks. And this actually gave me the opportunity to work on this case study that I'm finding out to be very exciting and really becoming kind of a core to the larger project that it's part of. So let me, without further ado, get into it. All right. Um, so first of all, a bit of shameless self-promotion. I am part of the Disability Studies Advocacy and Work Group with ASSIES. And so if you happen to come to the conference next week, we'd love to have you a week from today at 6:30 in Provincetown. Our working group discusses, whatever people want to bring to the discussion. One thing we've done is we set up this accessibility guide at ASSIES that now also lives on the website. I'm also developing, I'm crowdsourcing, and here's like a call out to anybody who wants to help, of glossaries that refer a language related to disability. There's several languages that I've been able to identify that are relevant for our studies in Romanian and Polish. And I'd love to hear. I got a friend who's working on Russian and Ukrainian, and so if people want to bring Bulgarian or Serbo-Croatian to the party through these glossaries, please let me know so we can populate the world with a more accessible type of language. So. After my bit for advocacy, let me describe a little bit what I'm doing with this project that is the focus of the talk today. So I'm writing what will be the first book about the history of disability in interwar Romania. And it's a tall challenge because the first thing that I've dealt with in trying to do this research is trying to figure out what disability means, how people talk about it. And I'm kind of stuck on that, meaning that I realize that what I need to do before any other kind of, social or more broadly cultural history of disability is I really need to focus on the ways in which discourses about disability are circulated, gain legitimacy and become really important for both, policy making, but also especially for the lives of disabled people. And so this book is going to have these 5 kind of general foci in dealing with disability discourses. So first of all, how laws talk about disability. And in this case, the military is incredibly important. Labor legislation about, work accidents, things like that. And then especially educational policy become very important here. There's also the medical kind of aspect of it, which has to do with public health, but all that is included in the labor and educational policies. Then there's the actual medical discourse, where you have a very vibrant set of publications, of curricular activities, of conferences, of organizations, and then their impact on all the legislative issues I just mentioned about before. You have then at the core of understanding these discourses is special education, how schools for children with disabilities develop in interwar Romania. What is medical pedagogy, which is something that starts developing in the interwar period, how that involves specialized types of disability pedagogy, the schools, and outcomes. And here's where my case study fits. It's a really great illustration of what can be done. Then you have the mainstream publications, newspapers, journals, and all that. And here I'm looking at how disability is represented in specific types of disabilities also, and how also disabled populations interact with those representations. Speaking of that, I have an article that's about to go into review with Slavic Review about deafness and mainstream publications. And then there's the literary and visual artistic representations, things that are more in the area of, both public monuments and also sort of high art. And these refer more, as well as, of course, novels, poetry, theater, so other kinds of depictions that speak to how mostly able-bodied authors and artists imagine disability and how they circulate these tropes. All right, why am I talking about disability? Why is it important? And maybe it's obvious to you, but I always would like to make an argument, right? There's the sort of a quantitative aspect to it, which is it's quite clear that a very large percentage, and larger than we possibly know, is in the world today is experiencing disability. The World Health Organization measures it at a sixth of the world's population. Of course, there's enormous differences across cultures and other kinds of categories of identity. And so that's just a very rough estimate, right? But I take caretakers to also be experiencing disability, maybe not in directly corporeal sense, but very much in an everyday sense. And so if we take these averages, it means about a third of the world's population is directly affected by disability. And that means it is really a core component of how we organize and spend our time on this planet, and therefore needs to be studied. The scholarship on disability up to now has highlighted multiple ways how the ways in which able-bodied individuals define everything from citizenship to the institutions of the everyday, the design of our spaces, categories of analysis, really marginalizes the specifics of the experiences of disabled people. And so this is also me deconstructing those ableist frameworks. Turns out, after doing quite a bit of research on this, that while I thought there was very little because I had ableist, glasses on, there's a lot that we can use and that we need to use to reinterpret our historical past. So this is also working along the grain of the archive and not just sort of finding bits and pieces. There's actually quite a lot. And so the other thing is that in spite of the averages I gave here, disability we know is very much underreported. I'm going to give you just an example. In Romania in 1899, 0.08 people were considered to be deaf. By 1930, it was 0.11. In terms of the percentage growth, that's a huge, huge percentage, and tells us basically much more about the underreporting in 1899 than the number of people who actually were deaf in 1930. The global average today is that 5% of the world's population has total loss of hearing and 20% partial. I recognize that my own tinnitus and other people's hearing problems might be a making of the loud music we listen to, but it's a huge difference between 0.11% and 5%, right? And so again, that speaks to me about the underreporting of disability and the need to really be talking about this more. Okay. Finally, what I know from the statistics in Romania is that of the already hugely underreported number of deaf children, only 20% attended specialized schools. So that means 80% remain without, knowledge of how to best communicate with the able-bodied or among themselves with others in their communities along the kind of sign language and other forms. Oralism was for the deaf population the primary skill that they were being taught in schools. So with that in mind, let me just jump into talking about this institute. And here's a picture of it taken in the interwar period. As you can see, it's a large, beautiful building. It has all the markings of late Habsburg imperial architecture. It is located on a main road in what used to be called Czernowitz. In the interwar period, it became Czernowitz, and today it's Czernowitz because it is now located in Ukraine. A little bit before the interwar period, so you're sort of acquainted with its specificities. So this institute opened on December 2nd, 1908. As I say here, it's the 26th such school in Austria-Hungary. The first school for the deaf was established in Vienna at the beginning, at the end of the 18th century, right? So by 1908, the Habsburg Empire has more than a century of having developed these schools. It is a leader in the techniques for specific pedagogy for both deaf children and blind children. So there are 100+ years of teachers being trained in such schools in the Habsburg Empire. What we see in the case of Czernowitz is that it was basically considered kind of a backwater at that point. Bukovina remained less developed than other urban centers in Austria-Hungary at that time, in part because of, I'll just call it, indifference on the part of the central authorities at that point in Vienna with regard to these needs for special education. There were continuous calls for about 25 years before this school was opened to invest money into a special school for children who were deaf and blind, and a lot of pressure bottom up. But it's only in 1908 that it finally opens. It opens because of efforts in both trying to get Vienna to invest in the school, but especially because of local fundraising. There's some social welfare funds that are allocated to things, having to do with the poor or disabled populations. Also, some of those goes to hospitals for children, for instance. And the people that really provide funds here are the governor, the members of the municipal committee, as well as doctors and other kind of well-to-do local people. What is really impressive to me in terms of the fundraising efforts here is that I see all the ethnic groups that are represented in Bukovina donating money for this effort. This is not an effort of the Austrians. This is not an effort of, the empire and the emperor. It is an effort of the people who live there and who care about it. That really marks it throughout the entire period. Even though most schools, for special schools for children with these kinds of disabilities are separate, so you have schools for the deaf and school for the blind. In this case, they decide to go together. Part of it, I think, is just that it was more practical to try to raise funds for both. And that it was most likely that they would be able to achieve the level of funding that they needed to build the school the way they wanted. There is a lot of critique from deaf activists for under support. And what they base their critique on mostly is statistics that develop in Austria-Hungary since basically the beginning of special education, since the beginning of the 19th century, about who's disabled. And those statistics show that the incidence of deafness is much higher than the incidence of blindness among both children and adults in the empire. And so you have, adult deaf activists who write in the local newspapers, criticizing the notion that this is going to be a school for the deaf and the blind, and pushing for basically having more spots reserved to the deaf children than to the blind children. This kind of internal strife continues in the interwar period, and a lot of it has to do with the level of underfunding for these schools from the central authorities at that point in Bucharest. So this is a school for everybody. There are records of children from all these communities participating. Also, very important, a large proportion of the student body are rural. Bukovina was, to some extent urbanized, but the vast majority of the population before World War I and in the interwar period lived in rural settings. The thing that's interesting is if you look at who lives in the rural areas, the Ukrainian and the Romanian populations predominate by a lot proportionally, right? But the people who articulate a need to serve, especially that population, are not necessarily ethnic Romanians and ethnic Ukrainians. You see Germans slash Austrians, the most powerful ethnic group in Austria-Hungary, also be active on behalf of, yes, let's try to find enough funding so that we can bring children from rural areas. And so the goal is to have people who cannot pay, and that is primarily parents of children in rural areas, not pay any fees or reduced fees. And in fact, the vast majority, something like 90% of the children who attend the school throughout its entire existence paid reduced or no fees. So a lot of this is based on both fundraising at the local level and then later on obtaining scholarships for these children from the Ministry of Education. The teachers at this point are also a mix. What I've identified is that you have Austrian or German and Romanian. There might be some Jewish teachers as well, but I can't tell from the information that I have and based on their names. These people were trained, as I said, in the schools that are already developed in Austria-Hungary, in Vienna especially. Some of them trained in Berlin. And in Paris, where some other techniques, especially for deaf children. So in Vienna and Berlin, the preponderance of the techniques taught to enable deaf children to communicate were oralist, which was lip reading and forms of kind of feeling vibration and associating the vibration of a person's speech in relation to specific words. It's its own technique. In Paris, the technique was primarily sign language. And so you have a mix of these kinds of trainings. And what I understand from what I've read is that both teachers and students use both of these techniques. In fact, oralism becomes used more kind of officially as part of the curriculum, but sign language is also part of it. It's not disallowed, let's put it this way. The language of study is German. For sign language, for Braille, for all the materials that are procured for the school. I want to stress that I don't see evidence of this being intentionally about turning, Ukrainian children or Polish children or Romanian children into German children. There are activists, some of them Romanian, that I've identified, who very vocally speak about how important it is to teach these kids German because it is the language of professional encounters, of public affairs, of governance. And Austria-Hungary, of course, they are in the Austrian parts of things, so Hungarian is not an issue here. And so their way of speaking about German is very much on a pragmatic level of empowering students to be able to communicate with those around them that they might need and they might have to depend on. So what's the curriculum? So the curriculum is very similar to that in other sort of basic schools where literacy and literature, grammar, right? Basic math, history, geography, religion. I'm gonna return to religion in just a minute. Music, for the blind children, music is one of the recurrent afternoon classes they have. Visual arts for deaf children. So when music classes are taking place for the blind children, there's visual arts for the deaf children. And then there's a whole curriculum from the very beginning for professional or practical activities. So this is, in effect, also a vocational school. Students are taught to build furniture, to engage in tailoring, sewing, broom making, typography, home management, and all of this is, of course, gendered. So you have women sew, men tailor, women take care of the home, men make furniture. Typography, interestingly, is also male, exclusively male. I have no idea why, because you're using your small motor abilities, which are not exactly gender specific. So that's the kind of a big picture of it. And most importantly, it's this issue, which is the way in which teachers set up this school. A very ambitious goal is to have a 1-to-1 ratio, especially for the first couple of years for the students. The idea being that while you're teaching a student the oralist, especially techniques, being able to physically be touching the other person in the proximity, being able to very clearly see and also feel, the vibration of a person's voice is something that is a key component of this type of curriculum. And so 1-to-1 ratio means a very expensive educational proposition, right? Where in no universe can a student individually pay for the salary, obviously, of the teacher that he or she will be spending time on all the time, right? There's also the issue of teaching all the instructors, some of whom are, furniture makers, how to engage with deaf children, right? So this is basically at the very beginning, there's a kind of platinum version of, we would love for this to be this way. It never really arrives at that level, but it certainly, there's a constant sort of struggle to not make the ratio too high in terms of the number of students per faculty. All right. So let me say a few things about the interwar history of the Institute. And I wanted to start with this image. Why? It's just a little story here. I mentioned typographers. When I started looking for documentation about, well, just special education in general, I stumbled upon this publication, was the Yearbook of the Institute. The Yearbook on the Institute looks in these three different ways that you can see here, right? For 3 different years. One is 1921, 1922, and 1934. The people who printed this institute's yearbook were the deaf students and the instructor of the institute. So I wanted to give you a visual of the core importance of the people who attended and taught at the school for enabling us as historians to actually tell the story. It cannot be told without these kinds of publications, and the fact that the people who put them together and made clearly very specific aesthetic choices, if you look at the 3 different yearbooks, right, to say something about the institute themselves and their ideas of, what a page looks like and what sort of symbols they want to use. That seems very important to me. I'll mark just a couple of things that I think are obvious and important. In the first version, which is the first post-war and the first yearbook that is connected to Romania being in charge of the institute. You see the Romanian flag and Romanian sort of traditional folk embroidery being presented, right? Red, yellow, and blue are the colors of the Romanian flag. So it's marked very Romanian in the way that the first page looks, right? You look at the second one, the very next year, where there's nothing of that sort of wink wink to the Romanian flag. And in fact, the depiction is one that elevates elements of the Jugendstil, right? The beautiful rose that you see around it. And I'm going to feature that in some other slides. Together with some other sort of abstract designs that remind me of both the Jugendstil and especially the Secession 1907 exhibit in Vienna, but also the development of Art Deco since then. And in the third version, you have a kind of a combination of, you see the institute represented. It's obviously a 25th anniversary sort of institute publication, but still you have elements of design like the 3, sort of inverted crowns below, which could also be the tracks of an animal, below that have a very different kind of look to them. And again, the Romanian flag is absent. So you can take these and interpret them as they want, but what's clear is that there's choices being made that are aesthetic and intellectual, and how these deaf typographers want to represent themselves. So a little bit about the history of the Institute, and then I'm going to talk about life in the Institute and then relationships with the state. In interwar Romania, this is the only school in which deaf and blind children are taught together. And all the other ones, they're separate, and you don't have in the same city necessarily both schools for deaf and blind. There's only 2 other cities in Romania, Cluj and Bucharest, where this is happening. This is, I am sure of it, the most ethnically and religiously diverse school in Romania throughout its entire existence, including in World War II. I think it's really important to stress this and I must say this again and again, because there was an attempt by the Romanian government from the beginning of the interwar period to turn Romanian education into ethno-nationalist version of what it means to teach children, basic education. And that means not just the use of Romanian as the language, but also in a kind of modification of the important texts such as how history is taught, how geography is taught, how literature is taught, in an ethno-nationalist version of itself. There's also policies that prevent schools that teach another language from doing so. Irina Livezeanu has an excellent book about this, Cultural Politics of Interwar Romania. What she does not do in that book is examine anything about special education. Well, nobody was looking at that time. But this is the school that, in my view, does not go at all in the direction that other schools went in Romania. I'll just say that I think the reason for that is the marginality of Bukovina. It's a place that's, far enough away from Bucharest and with staff and a local community that are vested enough in the success of the school as the teachers set it up to continue down that path. And because the group of people locally vested in this education are themselves not ethno-nationalist Romanians, some of them might be, but in fact, they work with people of diverse backgrounds. And I have not seen any evidence of disrespect along that line or discrimination. That sets it up as a, a school like no other, as I said in my title, right? So then after Romania entered World War II, the school was relocated close to a city called Cernauti in Romania, and it still exists there. And I am hoping to go and visit it in summer to find out what archives they have. The language of instruction switches to Romanian, which it had to in order for the school to operate. But I say that German is most likely present with the students and faculty. In fact, I'm almost 100% sure of that. I will show some evidence of that a bit later on. But Czernowitz remained a city in which German was spoken more prominently than Romania in the interwar period. And so in order to be able to get around, you had to know German. And so even though, let's say, students had to read, be they cited or uncited, Romanian literature, when they played around the schoolyard, it's very likely they were also chatting with each other in German. The other thing to mark about the Institute is due to the superior, without a doubt, training of these teachers in the institutes I mentioned before, and the kind of a longer track of, applying that pedagogy to the school, they ended up producing some of the most advanced special education textbooks for teachers and students for both blind and deaf education. I've seen these textbooks that have their own problems that deal with, oralism and, other concepts of how people communicate and what is normal and abnormal about disability. But they definitely stay away from the kind of eugenicists marked essentializing tropes that you find in a lot of other textbooks. So that to me is very important. This is also a group of individuals who are well connected. They have friends, teachers, collaborators who after 1918 live in Czechoslovakia, live in Hungary, live in Austria. And so they attend the teachers, the staff, sometimes the students, these international congresses. There's one in Prague in 1924, and it's very well publicized in the local press. There's reports, even debates among the individuals who participate in these congresses. In other words, it shows the Institute to be very much engaged in not just building structures and pedagogy in Romania, but staying connected with a larger community of activists and allies. And as I've already said, you have this amazing set of documents and publications that were generated by the deaf teachers and students. A little bit about the Romanian state. This is a picture of Dimitrie Rusciac, who's the director. I'll say a few things about him in just a second. So interestingly, in 1920, the Institute was just getting reopened during World War I. It stayed closed. The Red Cross used it as a hospital. There's a lot of destruction because of, the various problems in terms of, finding enough food or wood. Furniture was destroyed. Anyway, it starts to get rebuilt, and King Ferdinand of Romania visits it in 1920. Interestingly, I've not seen any reporting of it anywhere except in the local yearbook, which talks a lot about this visit. Everybody was very impressed. The king apparently was very impressed. And of course, Rusciac, who was already the director, made some appeals to the king about the specific needs immediately that the institute had in terms of, just rebuilding basic, furniture and other infrastructure, but also more regularized funding for those scholarship I was mentioning earlier. So it doesn't seem like the king, even though he was impressed, wanted to do anything with it in the future. What Ruschak and other leaders of the institute did is to reach out to Queen Marie to ask for her name to be used. And that's about it. A lot of people use the name of the monarchy and specific members of the monarchy to kind of designate themselves as important, as having some kind of stamp of approval. A lot of that was used for funding purposes. In this case, it doesn't seem like it really went anywhere. I really think that the already established tradition of fundraising in Czernowitz and Bukovina is what really kept them alive, as well as Chuck going and really trying to every year ask for money from the Ministry of Education. All right, so in 1924, Romania passes the first education law that makes any mention to special schools or special classrooms. In the law, special schools are identified as schools for either abnormal or subnormal students. This is the law. Anytime a teacher wants to apply to work at this institute, or a parent wants to send a student to this institute, legally their student is abnormal. This is part of the issue with the kind of ableist discourse that gets legitimated during the period. So Ruschak and others have to use that language, the stigmatizing language, in their official publications and exchanges with the government, because that's the law. But I have not seen the word abnormal being used in the Institute publications for any purposes to describe anybody at the Institute. That's very important to say, because that absence to me is very important. All right, so this 1924 education law, says, okay, all children have to go to school. Children who are abnormal and subnormal need to have their own classrooms, and parents need to send them to these schools. We need to have teachers. We need to have textbooks. We need to have classrooms. There's zero budgetary provisions for any of this. There are no standards established for teacher training. There's no official curriculum at all in the interwar period, and no funding set in stone, like so many millions lei per year will go to students who cannot afford to attend these schools. So it's basically feigning support without really providing support for special education. So what Ruschak does, because he takes this law as them being a kind of a promise, right? A promissory note from the government. Literally every year, he writes to the Ministry of Education, he goes to Bucharest, and he begs every year, can you please give us so many scholarships? We have all these students who are there already and some others who are applying. So it's never a regular budget. This guy works his butt off for the entire interwar period to make things work. So a few bits about life in the Institute. It's very clear to me that the way the curriculum is designed, it really focuses on integration. The school is in the middle of the city. I just want to say that again and again. It's not in a place where the students are marginal, never observed, never heard, never seen by the rest of the population. They're part of the city life. And that is very important because it normalizes the presence of both the deaf and blind populations that live there as something that was absolutely part of the fabric of Bukovinian society. The fact that they receive professional certification in specific trades is also an important thing. This was not a small matter, not just a piece of paper. It really told the local employers that these individuals really can be trusted to have the same preparation and ability to work in those trades as anybody else. And in fact, there is in publications put out by one deaf activist some very explicit calls for the people who live in Czernowitz to shop at, to work with these professionals who were disabled but had been certified. In other words, he is calling everybody in Czernowitz to participate in integrating. So it's not just the deaf and blind have to be integrated. The able-bodied need to do the work as well. It's the only place I've seen in Romania where that is going on. There is a selection. Not everybody who applies is in fact allowed. So you have cognitive abilities, a kind of, not a test, but a type of certification that happens at the very beginning. And so students years 7 to 15 participate. They're a mixed educational institution, liberal arts, and then in the afternoon, the kids go to different professional activities. They're separated by gender. I should add that there's a scandal that appears in the late 1920s about the institute and about the co-ed component. That there's allegations that, you know, cats and dogs sleeping together, people having sex, it's an awful thing, and that allegation goes nowhere apparently. But there's at least an intimation that maybe, you know, some of these people actually had erotic relations, and that's all I can say about it. I cannot in any way say yes or no. I've already highlighted the fact that there's a lot of ethnic groups present, that both Romanian and German are for sure spoken around there. The other thing is that religion and the way that it's taught, and that is about basically moral education, is left to each denomination. You literally have members of all these denominations come once a week. The kids go to whatever classrooms, you know, there were for each of these categories, the four categories, and then a minister, a rabbi, or a priest would spend an hour with the children, teaching them, you know, whatever that lesson was for that day. This continues in this institute after 1938. In January 1938, the Romanian state makes a very large percentage of the Jewish population of Romania at that time non-citizens. They're taken away their ability to work, to study, to engage in any kind of state-sponsored public activity. This is not the case in Czernowitz. For some reason, until and during World War II, the Jewish children continue to go to school there, and the local rabbi comes and gives religious lessons to these kids. So it's again very much not like the rest of Romania. The other cool thing is that some of the people who went to the school before 1918 continue to work there afterwards. So in that sense, they're not just teaching the students a variety of skills, but they're also modeling a success story for them as members of the disabled community. And that to me is also quite amazingly kind of unique about this place. So there's an interesting bit here that I take to be a sign of how healthy kind of a culture of support and allyship in this institute is. So around the time that the Prague Congress I mentioned before was taking place in 1924, you have a deaf activist, the guy who is the typographer of the Institute's yearbook. So, you know, the guy who designed everything, including the rows that you see here at the top. He writes a very critical article in a German language press. Again, ethnic Romanian, had no problem expressing himself in German or Romanian. In fact, he publishes a bilingual courier for the so-called deaf-mute throughout the interwar period. So he's practices bilingualism in his own very professional, kind of persona. Anyway, this guy starts to criticize the leadership of the institute, including Ruschak, the director I talked about. because he thinks that the deaf at the school are being treated poorly, that they're not seeing the kind of attention and support that the blind students are at the school. And he wants to call for more professional training for the deaf students. It's a very testy exchange. Ruschak responds, this guy responds. I mean, it goes back and forth a couple of times in the local paper, and then nothing happens. He retains, the guy's name is Czernowitz, from Czernowitz basically means. So Czernowitz retains his position as the trainer for all the typographers. He continues to work with Ruschak. He's representing part of the deaf community in meetings with the leadership and with guests from the outside. Basically, I think what happened, and I'm not sure if I'm going to find out more about it, but Ruschak listens and responds positively and adjusts how he leads the institution based on how this faculty member, Czernowitz, is asking him to go. I'll say again, this marks the institute as very much unlike the rest of how Romania is run and how special schools in Romania run in the interwar period. I'll say a bit more about the institute and the community, and then I think, then I'll end and we'll have questions. On the right side here, I have just a fragment of this newspaper that Czernowitz put out. And you can see that it's a bilingual paper, and all the articles were both in Romanian and in German throughout its existence. Advertisements could be placed in whatever language people wanted. I've seen German and Romanian so far. So I can say without any doubt that the one city in Romania that was informed all the time about the activities of the special schools in town were the people living in Cernauti. Glasul Bukovina, which is the regional paper that comes out in Romanian starting before 1918, but throughout the interwar period, publishes news all the time about the activities of people at the institute or the institute itself. They are almost 100% positive journalism. I've looked at every article about the institute. Some of them are just announcing there's 5 positions open for children who are deaf and need support, something like that. Or these 3 members of the community donated, I don't know how much money to the institute, or the institute had their Christmas party and the deaf children presented these paintings and then the blind children performed these songs. The community is very vested in the institute. The kind of frequency with which these stories appear tells that story. And that, of course, is both fueled by and fuels fundraising. It is really a unique aspect. I've not seen that kind of level of constant fundraising going on at any other special school in Romania at that time. And this kind of fundraising, even though the ministry does provide, as I said, some scholarships for the students with Ruschak asking, the community are the people who, for instance, when there's hyperinflation in the mid-1920s, costs of heating, electricity just are just huge, and they grow enormously from one trimester to the next. It's only because the local community steps up and keeps donating cash to help that they are able to keep the light on, literally. The other thing that's really interesting, in addition to this newspaper that I mentioned, is there's trade organizations, there's music beyond what the institute is doing, and then in general, education experts. All these areas of public activity are places where you have disabled citizens not just attend them, but they're also leaders, meaning that the able-bodied population works with them, sees them, hears them, is able to truly appreciate how much they're integrated. So the integration really does work, I would say, very well in this case. So to conclude, I see the school as a model for integration in a positive sense, not of kind of rendering invisible by integrate, but rather rendering visible by integrating, right? Adults and children with disability. It's still based on a charity model, having to do with fundraising rather than state support. But that is a model that functions here in a very successful way, because what I see is a sense of civic responsibility that is very specific to Bukovina, very specific to Czernowitz, and something that I think could be cultivated further in other places. So I will leave it at that and stop sharing so I can see your beautiful faces. Hello, everybody. Hi.
Well, if we just have a few minutes, because I know you have to.
Oh,
duck
shoot.
out, so just-
Yeah. Let's,
mean-
sorry, 5 minutes. Yeah, sorry.
5 minutes.
I
Well,
kept
I just-
talking.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you for sharing this wonderful, this is so fantastic. I mean, this has really opened my eyes, especially some of the numbers you're talking about around disabilities, or there's these stories we don't know about. It's just been like in our field, I don't think people have been working on this much in Eastern Europe, at least I haven't seen it. Maybe more in the Russian field, I don't know. But so thank you so much for bringing this to us. And this case is so interesting. It's like the Habsburg Empire continues to exist in that school in that town. I actually have my German side of the Habsburg German side of the family, where some of them were from Bukovina and had this Bukovina club in Kansas. So I would imagine we could have even been from that town. I don't know. I guess my question is like, were there from outside of the town kind of an awareness of what was going on in this school, and like, were there sort of negative attacks, or, especially from either eugenicist voices, nationalist voices, others who were concerned about what was going on in terms of, the school, the integrationist aspects, or the supporting of disabled populations kind of aspects?
I have not seen any negative press about the institute or calling out this kind of integrationist, and super supportive of, for instance, the Jewish students' attitude anywhere. Like, I have scoured the press locally or nationally. The one thing that I told you about the licentious, people sleeping around, but like even that doesn't say, oh, and look at all these Jewish students. These guys are so like the yearbook identifies every student by location, ethnicity, and religion. I mean, you can find where the students are from. Every student, right? You can find all the shtetls where these kids come from. And not a single one is identified anywhere as, oh, well, look at those Jews. Like, that's the thing that is to me so shockingly beautiful in contrast to everything else. Though it's interesting that I didn't say about the interwar period in Bukovina is they have a much higher proportion of people who are illiterate in the countryside. A majority of peasants in Bukovina are literate. That ain't the case anywhere else in Romania. I think it's connected.
Go ahead, Curly, probably just have one more minute.
Just
but
one
yeah.
more minute, Maria. First of all, thank you, because it's wonderful example, and I'm pretty sure this will be a wonderful book, just because the subject is so understudied, and it's less visible in a non-positive sense. Those stories should be brought about much more forward. My question is from, now I'm going to just put my political scientist hat, and I've been taking copious notes, and I can tell you that what we're seeing, what you have described through this thick description of the archives and all the material that exists, it clearly points out that this particular institution, just as you've chosen in the title of your book, is what we will call in social science a clear outlier. It is like, if everything is clustering here, this is like a blip on the radar, like way out there. So my question would be immediately, because you were talking about probably some of the most important, from my perspective, factors that did affect, the existence and operation of this school. So my understanding is that because it was supported and integrated with the local community and local funds, I've written to myself also that there is this declarative, if you will, sort of relationship with the state. Oh yeah, you guys are great, the monarch's here, wonderful. And then you have the director, going every time in Bucharest, that's what you said, every year. And he's like, where's my budget, right? Or can you please do something? And they're like, yeah, of course, next year. So my question to you is, what, if we have to sort of characterize the qualities of being such an outlier and a really important one, what is the key factor that makes it, to stand out so much? Is it because of the literacy that you suggested? Is it because it is local? Is it because it had a model of integrating, two disabilities, together and then treating them equally, and then you had, of course, the activists that, kept writing that they're, unequally treated, or was it something else?
I think it's all these things. It's very hard for me to put a hierarchy here because it is such an outlier in all these ways, right? And I don't measure quantitatively, especially with the data that I have, sort of, oh, they're all like this, and then 5% more is here or 10% more here, right? But all the things you brought up, I mean, I have this overarching kind of sense of the marginality of this place protects it from
Uh-huh.
being drawn into the drama from Bucharest and the kind of obsessive control that the Bucharest authorities wanted to place on education, like the stuff that Irina Livezanu talks about, right? So because the guy at the top of the food chain, Ruschak, right, super competent, also, good ethnic Romanian, so he can like present, unthreatening when he goes to Bucharest, right? He doesn't have a Jewish name or whatever, right? He keeps it in place. Like it's competent leadership. Don't
Certainly.
play the game.
Politics.
Exactly. And keep it local, man. Keep it local, and that keeps the population there supporting the place because it's like, oh, it's our kids. Yeah, okay, we see.
This is fantastic, and thank you for answering this. I know it was a complex, but marginality protected is something I've taken in my notes, and the sort of periphery as a blessing in disguise. This is what I'm taking out of this thing so far. We're looking forward to the book. That's certainly
Yes.
is.
We should let Maria go because I think you need to be in another meeting.
One more word, there's a lot of work being done on marginality and the kind of power vulnerability in the Western Balkans as well. There's a couple of books that came out like not too long ago. And I've been looking at some of those forms of thinking about empowerment via marginality. So yeah, that's part of the argument. All right, you got to run, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.